Quando as ruas de Londres e outras cidades inglesas explodiram no ano passado em ações violentas de saques e incêndios, um detalhe chamou a atenção de sociólogos e outros analistas. O movimento não tinha slogans políticos, não articulava exigências, nem apresentava protestos. Teóricos tentam explicar a explosão, responsabilizando desde a ausência de estrutura familiar, a pobreza, desemprego, falta de educação formal e de perspectivas, sobretudo para os jovens. O sociólogo Zygmunt Bauman, polonês radicado na Inglaterra, tem sua própria versão. Ele viu nos distúrbios ingleses a expressão radical da sociedade de consumo, onde as pessoas buscam sua identidade não naquilo que são, mas no que consomem e exibem. Como se dissessem, eu sou o que eu compro. Esse fenômeno faz parte da fluidez na sociedade de consumo, onde não se valoriza o permanente, mas o temporário. Onde predomina o que Bauman chama de modernidade líquida, na medida em que nada é sólido ou conserva a forma por muito tempo. Tudo em mudança, vive-se inconstância, o que provoca insegurança e medo. Bauman é prolixo na produção de artigos, conferências e livros. Suas obras correm mundo, inclusive o Brasil, onde ele tem uma dúzia de livros publicados e bem vendidos. Bauman recebeu o milênio em sua casa em Leeds, norte da Inglaterra.
Professor, the world seems to be entering another financial crisis. We barely got out of the one of 3 years ago, and now people are thinking that this one is going to be just as bad. What is that doing to people? What is it doing to society?
I am not sure whether we are entering another depression. As far as I can judge, we never went out of depression since 2 or even 3 years ago. We are still in a very bad predicament, particularly if you ask about the situation of ordinary people, not the situation of stock exchanges, banks, or even governments, but ordinary people. They are living in a lot of anxiety and fear without any interruption because, as you well know, in most countries, with very few exceptions in the world, there is a long-term unemployment, and unemployment which is constantly rising. For the last 30 years, it was exactly like that young people took the point to which their parents brought them as their own starting point. They will go further on. They will advance beyond what their parents did. Now, the shocking discovery that they will be lucky if they retain what their parents already achieved.
That creates a different kind of society, doesn't it?
There's a different kind of society, and we were used through the period of neoliberal economics, Reagan-Thatcher economics, to the idea that we can live on credit. Why on credit? Because with the course of time, it would be easier and easier to repay our debts. The prices of our homes will go up and up endlessly, and all banks and credit card issuers were insisting to us to take credit cards and take loans because they themselves got used to living and profiting out of people repaying interest on the loans. A person without loans, without debts, is useless for the bank. There's no profit out of it.
It's a credit society,
Precisely.
a consumer society and a credit society.
Yes, well, this boom which we went through in the last 20, 30 years was entirely by spending money which we have not earned. Enjoy yourself now and pay later. That was the philosophy. We have moved, 30 years ago, we have moved from the culture of saving books into the culture of credit cards, which is exactly the opposite, exactly the opposite. And now the time came to take consequences, face the consequences. The fabulous sums which were paid into banks to recapitalize them by the government will have to be repaid by our children and our grandchildren. We have mortgaged the future, not only of our own generation, but of the future generation.
Thinking about that, the credit of the consumer society it makes me think of the summer when we had riots in England, and you were here then, and I assume you were not surprised to see that the main targets were shops. These young people were going for tennis shoes and special labeled shirts, and they didn't seem to have, at least in the open, a political cause as such. They wanted to consume. Isn't that how you see it?
Yeah, well, it was to be expected, actually. In the areas of London where all that happened, there was 3 times higher than average unemployment. So there were plenty of people unemployed, plenty of young people particularly unemployed, having nothing to do, and bored to death without prospects of job. And just imagine yourself in their position. Just in the middle of the area, in the middle of the neighborhood, is a glittering shopping mall, supermarket, something like that, inviting everybody who has the right to entry. There are no visas officially to enter, but there are armed guards who spot people who are loitering, who are not promising to be clients, and they do whatever they can not to let them in. The message of the consumerist society was sent to all of us, not just to selected people. The ordinary average man today sees in one day more commercials than people 100 years ago saw in almost the whole life of there.
So
we are
is it
flooded by enticements, by
whether he can buy it or
temptations.
not?
Precisely, everybody gets the same message. Only some people can do something about it. Just remember that those people who rebelled in London, they stole goods, but they also burned them. It was act of vengeance on the fortresses of consumerism into which they were not allowed to go. Stealing was one thing, but it was not just the question of getting goods which motivated them. It was revenge themselves for humiliation of being disqualified consumers in a consumerist society.
What parallels would you establish, if any, with for instance, the movements, the protests, and the action taking place in different European capitals, mostly by young people, Madrid, Athens, Paris, and compare it to what happened in London?
Yeah, that's a wide. No. London was so far was unique consumerist rebellion. It was the imperfect consumerist rebellion against consumerism, not in order to abolish consumerism, but in order to join the consumer orgy, at least for 3 nights. A carnival event, just a break in somber and dark reality. It was very unique phenomenon. But you are mentioning really massive phenomenon, which is extremely interesting and also showing that something very important is changing in our society. And the rebellions in banlieue, all over France at some point. Then in Madrid, the movement of the indignant people. In Athens, you had the rebellion against the overspending and cutting spending and the assault on social rights of people there. imposed by the almost bankruptcy of the country. In Israel, you had middle-class people going to the street and protesting against the government, which spends all the money on military purposes and doesn't care for the well-being. And then you have all over Arab countries, you have the movement, the same kind of a movement. People go to the streets, people go to the public square and refuse to leave until this particular regime, which doesn't give them citizenship rights, is abolished and opens and vacates the room for some kind of a different system. What kind, I don't know. When I was a young person, the major question which occupied myself and my contemporaries, young people like me, was the question, what is to be done? What should we do? What to do to make society better? Today the major question is no longer like that. People are generally diffusely, vaguely afraid and anxious, but they don't have a model of a good society without anxiety.
No utopia.
Yes, so the major question today is not what to do. People even don't come to think about what is to be done, because on the way to asking this question, there's another question, much more difficult to answer. The question, who is going to do it? And why this question emerged? Let's go one step further. My hypothesis that the real cause of this new importance of the question who is going to do it is what I call divorce between power and politics. Power is ability to do things, and politics is ability to decide which things ought to be done. Power and politics, until quite recently, 50 years ago, it was obvious for everybody that both power and politics are in the state government. And if only we decide, you and me and all the rest, what needs to be done, it will be done. Because the state has the authority to decide that, and the state has the power to do things. But it is not any longer the case, because we live through divorce between power and politics. Even in such a developing and thriving country as today, Brazil, for example, you have to reckon with the worldwide situation, right? What is happening much before the reach, beyond the reach of even United States government, are the global forces, multinationals of all sorts, you know. Many aspects of our condition which decide about our prospects, our ability to do things, our possibility of improve our condition and so on, are beyond the reach of any existing political institution.
I wanted to link the beginning of our conversation with what you just described. We have a financial crisis going on. We have these successive programs of austerity to trying to balance the books, as it were. And we have the consumer society. You know, if you have austerity, it's going to be very hard to go through the principles of a consumer society. Therefore, you're going to build up frustration, won't you?
Austerity is not the answer, really. It is imposed. It is perhaps even necessity, because simply what is the alternative? Printing more money and creating inflation like in 1920s or 1930s. It is a necessity, but it is not a cure. It is not a cure. If there are cuts, and there are cuts, if there is the policy of austerity, and there is policy of austerity, then the national wealth won't be produced. And if national wealth is not produced, then the depression deepens. Then it's not cured. We can get out or at least mitigate partly our financial troubles, but doesn't mean that unemployment won't grow. It doesn't mean that standard of living will not fall. So in the social terms, not in financial terms, depression will deepen.
We're still faced with the push, as you were mentioning, the commercials, the massive commercials who wants us to buy new products, buy a model A, B, and C, new and improved, as they say.
Yes, but remember that the whole idea of consumerism, the whole idea of consumerism as a panacea for all the troubles and formula for good life, for successful life, for happy life, for prosperous life, this whole idea is very young. It was born by the late 19th century, so it's historical accident in a sense, right? It looks that we are standing in front of very, very fateful choice. And the choice will have to be made, whether it will be made willingly, consciously, with awareness, or whether it will be imposed on us, because we won't have any other solution to our problems. But the choice is there. I call recently I started to call our present situation of interregnum. Interregnum is a very old concept. It comes from Titus Livius, historian in ancient Rome, who wrote history of Rome ab urbe condita, from the creation of the state, of the city. And the first interregnum was when the first king of ancient Rome, Romulus, after 38 years of rule, died. It's not clear, because some people said that he went straight to heaven, so he didn't die. By the way, he disappeared. 38 years. Now, the average length of human life at that time was exactly 38 years, which means that the moment he died, there was virtually not a single person who remembered life without Romulus. All were used to the fact that all the prescriptions and proscriptions came from one source, Romulus. And suddenly he disappeared. Just imagine yourself in this situation.
So you have a period between kings.
You don't know what to do, really. You don't know what to do. No, but it was particularly dramatic. Not just routine change of one king after another, but disappearance of the only source of authority until the next king, which was Numa, was appointed. There was more than 1 year, and 1 year was the year of complete confusion. People were simply felt abandoned. They didn't know what to do. There were no orders of the day of any sort. We are in such an interregnum at the moment. Interregnum means simply that the old ways of doing things no longer work, but the new ways of doing things have not been yet invented. That's interregnum. And that's why I'm very shy of predicting future, because it may turn any kind of direction.
This new generation has been exposed to extensively, as we spoke about before, is the idea that there's no longer privacy, that people's lives are exposed, their secrets are exposed, the celebrity culture has taken over, and people even impose their intimacy on you. Mm-hmm. That's a fairly new phenomenon.
They impose, but the need of exposure, public exposure, of public spiritual striptease, so to speak, has been internalized. It is no longer imposed. 8 years old, 10 years old children are known today to spend several hours a day in front of their laptops, telling everything about themselves to everybody who wants to read and who wants to
or even
listen.
Those who don't.
Yeah. There's the feeling that unless you are seen, well, not everybody can be seen on television. Of course, if you are seen on television, then you are really an important person. But if you can't, then at least you are seen on the screen of computer. Perhaps someone by accident will wander into your website, into your blog.
Or your Facebook
yes,
page.
and writes to you, sends you a message. Then you feel that you are really a member of the world, that you are not left behind, you didn't fall out of the vehicle, you were not kicked out, you have not been excluded, you are in. That is the way we are in with the help of online, virtual reality, right? In offline is more and more deserted because of the offer of sociality, of gregariousness, of togetherness, of friendship, taken over by online implements, by online offers. So it is another very big change, and again, it is too early to sum it up and make any sort of certain confident predictions how it will develop. But if you add to it also the commercialization of human morality, what I mean by that we have been already converted to obsessive compulsive consumerism, so we have to work very hard. The borderline between job time, work time, and leisure time, office time and family time has been effaced. So you forget about your duty, moral duty towards your son or daughter or your wife.
You're always on.
You can't devoid your time. You can't dedicate your time to them. So what do? You buy expensive gifts to compensate for your absence. And the more expensive gift, the more profound is allegedly your moral responsibility and your love. So all this taken together, they are signals of very profound changes, cultural changes. I think we are going through a very profound real cultural revolution. But I don't feel really able, knowledgeable enough to responsibly risk prognosis in what direction it will go. Because as you rightly said, there are so many contradictory pressures. On the one hand, austerity, on the other hand, consumerism. How to reconcile them?
Professor, thanks very much. I think it was enlightening.
All right.